Frank Bennett didn't plan to drop the coffee mug that morning, it just slipped, right out of his hand, shattering on the faded linoleum like it was announcing something final. He stood there staring at the broken pieces, the way the black coffee puddled and spread across the floor like a slow-moving shadow, and he muttered to no one in particular, "Guess that's life now." The ache in his wrist was sharper than usual, a reminder from the arthritis that time wasn't just passing, it was grinding him down. The kitchen, once full of the smell of his wife's baking, now carried only the sterile scent of microwaved meals and old wood. There was no radio playing, no humming, no movement except the tiny tremble in his hands. It was just Frank and the pieces. He bent down to clean it up, cursing under his breath when the pain caught him off guard again. Another day. Another ache. Another mug gone. He turned on the tiny TV by the sink, not because he cared what was on, but because the silence was louder than anything else. Local news, commercials, reruns. His life felt like that too, reruns. He shuffled to the recliner, easing into it like slipping into resignation. Outside, the Nebraska sky was a thick blanket of gray. He used to love days like this, when he and Linda would sip hot cocoa and watch storms roll in. Now, it just made him feel heavier. His hand reached for the remote and clicked over to YouTube, not because he was looking for anything, but because it felt like the closest thing to the outside world. He scrolled past videos of pranksters and cooking hacks, until something caught his eye, a short clip titled, Elon Musk, the 5 words that changed everything. He didn't even like Elon Musk, really. Thought he was a bit of a showboat. But something in the still frame, something in the bold white letters drew him in. He clicked. The video opened on a conference stage, Elon sitting in a wrinkled black t-shirt, looking like he hadn't slept in days. The interviewer asked, "What would you say to someone who feels like they're out of time?" Elon leaned forward, eyes sharp, voice steady, and said, "You're not dead yet. Build." Frank blinked. Rewound it. Listened again. "You're not dead yet. Build." 5 words. But they hit him like a freight train. He sat there frozen, staring at the screen, hearing them echo in his head, louder than the creak of the chair, louder than the wind outside. "You're not dead yet. Build." He didn't know why, but suddenly his hands stopped shaking. He wasn't crying, not exactly, but something inside cracked. Like a light had flickered on in a long dark room. What was that? Inspiration? Grief? Regret? All of it, probably. Frank leaned back, heart pounding, memories flooding. The garage. The smell of sawdust. The sound of Linda laughing when he made that crooked jewelry box. The kids in shop class who used to bring him broken toasters and leave with fixed dreams. He hadn't built a thing in 20 years. Not since Linda died. Not since the school forced him into early retirement, saying budgets were tight and woodshop was outdated. He remembered throwing his last set of blueprints into the trash. Remembered closing the garage door and never opening it again. He had convinced himself he was too tired, too sore, too irrelevant. But those 5 words poked holes in every excuse he had built around himself like armor. "You're not dead yet. Build." What if he tried again? Not something big. Not a rocket, for God's sake. Just, something. A birdhouse. A stool. That old rocking chair he never finished, the one he started for Linda when her back first started hurting. It was still in the corner of the garage, he thought. Half sanded. Covered in dust and silence. He stood up. Not quickly, not dramatically. It was more like watching a seed push out of dry soil. He walked slowly to the back door, pulled on his old Carhartt jacket, the one Linda patched for him years ago, and stepped outside. The air was cold, sharp with October, and it made him feel awake. Not young. But alive. He reached for the garage handle. It creaked, resisted. Of course it did. Everything around here resisted change. He gave it a second pull and the door groaned open. The smell hit him first: dust, old oil, wood. Time. The chair was still there. Same place. Still unfinished. He ran a hand across the seat. The grain remembered him. His tools sat on the wall like soldiers waiting for orders. Something inside Frank stirred, something he hadn't felt in years: purpose. Not the kind you read about in self-help books. Real, gritty, personal purpose. He walked inside, flipped the light. One of the bulbs flickered out, but the others held on. He sat on the stool by his workbench, wiped off a layer of grime, and looked around. He whispered, "You're not dead yet. Build." Then he opened a drawer and picked up the old measuring tape. The cold metal felt right in his hand. Heavy. Familiar. He smiled. Just a little. Back in the kitchen, the mug was still broken on the floor, coffee stains slowly drying. But in the garage, something long dead was waking up. Hit subscribe and leave a comment with where you're watching from. This story might just spark a new beginning. What's one thing that always pushes you forward, even when things get tough? Frank Bennett remembered the smell of cedar before he remembered the sound of his own voice. It used to cling to his clothes, live under his fingernails, follow him home from the school workshop like a quiet shadow. For over 30 years, he'd taught shop class at Milltown High, just off Highway 6, where the hallways smelled like floor wax and hormone battles, and where he was Mr. B to 3 generations of kids who didn't know what they were good at until he put a tool in their hands. That was before the program was cut, before the administrators started calling hands-on learning optional, and before Frank became another line item on a spreadsheet. He hadn't seen the inside of that building in 20 years, but he could still feel the energy of those early mornings when the first bell hadn't even rung, and yet half a dozen kids were already in the shop, finishing projects, gluing joints, sanding edges. He'd had a purpose then. A rhythm. Frank would arrive before dawn, the hallways still dark, the machines cold and quiet. He'd unlock the storage cabinet with the same brass key Linda had put on a tiny compass keychain years earlier, so you never get lost, even if you're not great with maps, she joked. Linda. Her name still landed in his chest like a stone. They had met in 1975 at a church fundraiser where Frank was volunteering to build a dunk tank. She was the choir leader's sister. She walked up to him, hands on hips, and said, "That thing looks like a lawsuit waiting to happen." He laughed, told her she could help fix it if she was such an expert. She stayed the whole afternoon, holding wood in place while he drilled, criticizing his handwriting on the signage, insisting the water be warmer than Arctic bath levels. He fell in love that day. She said she did too, though she never let him forget how crooked the dunk tank ladder was. They got married the next summer. He built most of their furniture himself. Oak bed frame, pine kitchen table, 2 cherry wood chairs for the front porch. They never had a lot of money, but they had warmth, and they had pride. Every holiday, Linda would decorate the table he'd made with flowers or garland or red and green runners, and every time someone came over, she'd point at it and say, "Frank built that. Didn't buy it. Built it." He'd act modest, but inside, it meant the world. That table still sat in the kitchen, though one of the legs wobbled now, and the varnish had peeled. He hadn't fixed it. He didn't even eat there anymore. After she passed, he started using a TV tray instead. It was easier that way. Less empty space. They'd wanted kids for years before Eric came along. Linda had miscarried twice. By the time they had him, she was 41, and Frank thought he'd never love anything more than the sight of that tiny baby wrapped in a yellow blanket. Eric was brilliant and stubborn, took apart the toaster at age 6 and turned it into a pencil sharpener by accident. As he got older, though, the space between them widened. Eric didn't care for woodworking. He was a numbers kid. Computers, science, data. Frank tried to connect, but every attempt felt like trying to plane a crooked board, it always came back uneven. They had their worst fight the year Linda died. Eric had flown in from Seattle, where he was working in finance. Frank had just retired. The house felt like a mausoleum. Eric accused him of shutting down, said, "You're just going to waste away in that garage." Frank, already cracked wide open with grief, snapped, "At least I built something with my life. You just count other people's money." The words landed like a punch. Eric left 2 days later and never came back. Frank had reached out, birthday cards, voicemails, emails, but the replies were short, infrequent, clinical. "Thanks. Doing well. Busy." And so the years rolled by, gray and quiet. Frank's hands grew stiffer. His back, once strong enough to lift entire cabinets alone, began to creak and twinge. The tools in the garage started to rust. One day, without realizing it, he threw out a pile of old designs he'd drawn on yellow legal pads. It was like tossing out an entire version of himself. Gone, just like that. Mornings were the hardest. Waking up without a reason to move quickly, without anyone expecting anything from him. Breakfast became an afterthought. TV filled the space between meals. Sometimes he'd drive to the diner in town just to hear someone say his name. "Hey Frank, usual today?" "Yeah," he'd answer. The usual. There was a sadness to becoming the kind of man whose presence didn't change a room. Who could go missing for a day, or 3, and no one would know. He thought of himself as background noise, still running, but not really heard. There had been moments, here and there, where the fire flared briefly. Once, he helped a neighbor's son fix his bike chain. Another time, he repaired a broken drawer at the diner when the waitress couldn't close it. Each time, his hands remembered. The muscle memory was there. But afterward, he'd retreat. Like it was a fluke. Like he wasn't allowed to matter anymore. He started collecting little notebooks. Writing down ideas he'd never build. Table that folds into wall. Storage bench with heater. Chair that rocks at 2 speeds. They were good ideas, maybe even great. But every time he looked at them, a voice in his head would whisper, "Too late." And he'd put the notebook away. At night, he sometimes heard Linda's voice in his dreams, usually humming, or asking if he could bring her tea, or teasing him about how he always forgot to label the screws. Once, about a year ago, he had a dream where she stood in the garage doorway, bathed in golden light, and said, "You've still got it, you know." He woke up crying. He didn't tell anyone. There was no one to tell. The unfinished chair had remained in the corner of the garage all that time. Half built. Covered in a tarp. Frank hadn't touched it since the funeral. He told himself it would hurt too much. But the truth was, that chair represented the last time he believed he still had something worth giving. He'd meant it to be her retirement gift. A chair to sit in on the porch while she read the stack of novels she always said she'd get to, someday. Someday never came. He hated that chair. And he loved it. And he couldn't bear to look at it. So he didn't. Not for 20 years. Until that morning. Until 5 words from a man he'd never met knocked something loose in his chest. "You're not dead yet. Build." Frank knew those words weren't meant for him directly. Elon Musk wasn't talking to retired shop teachers in forgotten towns. He was talking about Mars, or batteries, or God knows what. But it didn't matter. The words didn't know where they landed. They just landed where they were needed. And Frank needed them. They were like jumper cables to the heart. That spark, however small, had reached all the way back into the place where his dreams had curled up and fallen asleep. He couldn't stop thinking about that quote. It followed him through breakfast, through the clink of silverware on the plate, through the whistle of the kettle. He repeated it as he walked to the garage door. "You're not dead yet. Build." It wasn't just a quote. It was permission. The muscle memory was there. But afterward, he'd retreat. Like it was a fluke. Like he wasn't allowed to matter anymore. He started collecting little notebooks. Writing down ideas he'd never build. Table that folds into wall. Storage bench with heater. Chair that rocks at 2 speeds. They were good ideas, maybe even great. But every time he looked at them, a voice in his head would whisper, "Too late." And he'd put the notebook away. At night, he sometimes heard Linda's voice in his dreams, usually humming, or asking if he could bring her tea, or teasing him about how he always forgot to label the screws. Once, about a year ago, he had a dream where she stood in the garage doorway, bathed in golden light, and said, "You've still got it, you know." He woke up crying. He didn't tell anyone. There was no one to tell. The unfinished chair had remained in the corner of the garage all that time. Half built. Covered in a tarp. Frank hadn't touched it since the funeral. He told himself it would hurt too much. But the truth was, that chair represented the last time he believed he still had something worth giving. He'd meant it to be her retirement gift. A chair to sit in on the porch while she read the stack of novels she always said she'd get to, someday. Someday never came. He hated that chair. And he loved it. And he couldn't bear to look at it. So he didn't. Not for 20 years. Until that morning. Until 5 words from a man he'd never met knocked something loose in his chest. "You're not dead yet. Build." Frank knew those words weren't meant for him directly. Elon Musk wasn't talking to retired shop teachers in forgotten towns. He was talking about Mars, or batteries, or God knows what. But it didn't matter. The words didn't know where they landed. They just landed where they were needed. And Frank needed them. They were like jumper cables to the heart. That spark, however small, had reached all the way back into the place where his dreams had curled up and fallen asleep. He couldn't stop thinking about that quote. It followed him through breakfast, through the clink of silverware on the plate, through the whistle of the kettle. He repeated it as he walked to the garage door. "You're not dead yet. Build." It wasn't just a quote. It was permission. Listening to the stillness. The air smelled of oil, aged wood, and time itself. There was a faint sound of traffic on the highway a few blocks away. Life was happening out there. He just had to decide if he wanted back in. Hours passed. He didn't even notice until his stomach growled. He went inside, made a sandwich, and as he sat at the kitchen table, really sat there for the first time in years, he opened his tablet and scrolled. News. Noise. Ads. Then another video popped up, an interview with Musk again, mid-sentence. "Some people stop living long before they die." Frank froze. It was like the screen could hear his thoughts. He clicked on the video. Musk, dressed in that same worn black shirt, looked exhausted but alive. He spoke about risks, about building things even when no one else believed. He said failure was part of the process, not the end of it. Frank didn't care much about space or cars or crypto, but he understood failure. He had lived it. Worn it. But this was different. It didn't feel like failure anymore. It felt like delay. He went to the cabinet and pulled out a notebook. Not one of the ones he used to write ideas in and hide away. This one was blank. He flipped it open and wrote, "Finish the chair. Build something every week. Talk to Eric." That last one scared him more than any power tool ever had. But it stayed on the page. The next day, he returned to the garage. Picked up a sanding block. His hand protested. His wrist barked in protest. But he gritted his teeth and began anyway. Sand. Pause. Breathe. Sand again. The sound brought memories. Music in muscle. Purpose in pain. For the first time in a long time, he forgot what day it was. That night, he ate at the table again. Not on the tray. He even set out 2 plates before catching himself. He left the second one anyway. Old habits die last. The third morning came with doubts. He scrolled his messages, unsure why. A message from Eric sat unopened for weeks. Just an auto-reply. Busy, will get back soon. Frank stared at it. His fingers hovered. But he didn't reply. Not yet. Instead, he clicked on a podcast, a random one. A host was ranting about how society discards older generations like outdated phones. We treat wisdom like it's a liability, the host said. But imagine if the people who built the world weren't made to feel useless just because we're obsessed with youth. Frank exhaled hard through his nose. It wasn't validation. It was confirmation. The world had moved on without him, but that didn't mean he had to stay off the ride. That day, at the diner, he sat at the counter, reading the newspaper, real paper, not digital, and overheard 2 young men talking about side hustles, digital this, crypto that, building passive income. Frank stirred his coffee. One of them glanced over. "You retired?" the kid asked. Frank nodded. "What did you do?" "Built things," he said simply. The kid grinned. "Cool. Like, with wood?" "Like with anything," Frank said. The kid laughed politely and turned back to his phone. That's when it hit Frank again, he was invisible. Even when he spoke, people heard nostalgia, not relevance. And that stung. On the walk home, that sting festered. He thought, maybe I'm wrong. Maybe I should sit down. Shut up. Fade like they expect. But then, a teenager flew past him on a skateboard, lost control, and crashed into a fence. Frank rushed over. The kid had scraped his knee, nothing serious. Frank helped him up. "You all right?" "Yeah," the boy muttered. "Stupid board's always loose." Frank crouched slowly, checked the wheels. "Your trucks need tightening." The kid blinked. "You know about boards?" "I know about balance," Frank said, tightening the bolt with his pocket multi-tool. The kid looked at him, surprised. "Thanks, man. Thought you were just, old?" Frank asked. The kid flushed. "No offense." "None taken." As the kid skated off, Frank felt something new settle in his chest, not pride, not even joy. It was presence. He was part of the world again. That night, he opened his email and stared at Eric's name. Still nothing. He opened a draft. Typed a sentence. Deleted it. Tried again. Then closed the laptop. Too much. Too soon. He turned on the TV. A commercial came on, all soft lighting and fake laughter, advertising some new retirement community. The voiceover said, "You've worked hard. Now it's time to rest." Frank grabbed the remote and shut it off. "To hell with that," he muttered. He stood, walked to the garage again, and turned on the light. Picked up a chisel. Ran it along the edge of the armrest. The wood curled and fell like shavings of doubt. His hand trembled. But he didn't stop. He wouldn't. That night, he wrote a new list. Fix chair. Message Eric. Record build. Post online. He stared at that last one. Could he share something? Put it out there for strangers to see? He didn't know the first thing about social media. But maybe it didn't matter. Maybe the point wasn't who saw it. Maybe the point was doing it at all. The next day, he set up an old phone on a tripod made from a broomstick and clamps. He hit record. Cleared his throat. "I'm Frank," he said. I'm 71. I used to build things. And I guess I'm going to try again. He paused. This chair's for my wife. Took me 20 years to get back to it. But maybe it's not too late. He posted it. Called the account the Rusty Phoenix. Then he went back to work. Later, he checked his phone. 3 views. No likes. No comments. But the chair was smoother. The joints were tighter. And his heart beat steadier. Is this it? Maybe not. Maybe this is the beginning. Frank never expected anyone to watch the video. That wasn't why he recorded it. He recorded it because something inside told him he needed to say it out loud, needed to hear his own voice stake a claim on the world again. I'm Frank. I'm 71. I used to build things. And I guess I'm going to try again. Those words had cost him something to say, like reaching into a cold lake and pulling out a part of himself that had sunk too deep for too long. The next morning, he poured coffee, stood at the window, and stared at the gray sky like it held a message. He thought about the chair, about Linda, about the pain in his knees, and about how time always won, until it didn't. Then he checked his phone. 9 views. Still no likes. No comments. But he didn't care. He just smiled and walked into the garage. This time he brought a chair cushion with him, the one Linda had sewn with sunflower fabric, and placed it on the workbench so he could sit without aching too much. The chair frame waited, and today he planned to install the cross supports. He took a moment, running his fingers along the grooves he'd carved 2 decades ago. They were still smooth, still solid. He whispered, "You waited for me." Then he got to work. Measure twice. Mark with pencil. Cut slow. He could hear Linda's voice in his head reminding him, "Frank, you always rush the first cut," and he chuckled under his breath. Not this time. He was slower now, not just because of age but because of reverence. Every movement mattered. Time wasn't something to race anymore, it was something to honor. Hours passed and the garage filled with that sweet smell of freshly cut pine, warm and soft like memory. He paused only to sip water and stretch his back. When he finished the supports, he stood back and admired the work. It wasn't perfect. The angles were slightly off. But it held. And it meant something. He took another video. This time, he didn't say much. Just filmed the chair, zooming in on the joints, letting the silence speak for itself. He uploaded it to his YouTube channel, The Rusty Phoenix. The name had come to him out of nowhere the night before. Something about the way rust signaled age, and how the phoenix signaled rebirth. It felt like him. Old bones. New fire. That night, he slept deeply, dreaming of sawdust and blueprints and Linda laughing on the porch. The next morning, 32 views. Still no likes. Still no comments. But Frank felt something brewing anyway. Something alive. He went to the garage again, sanded the edges of the seat. As he worked, a voice inside asked, "Why now?" And another answered, "Because waiting won't make it easier." He remembered Elon's words again, "You're not dead yet. Build." They became a kind of rhythm. He whispered them every time doubt crept in, every time his shoulder groaned or his hand cramped or his eyes blurred. They were better than medicine. Better than prayers. They were action. On day 4, he tried filming himself talking again. This time he spoke with more confidence. "People think once you retire, you're just done. But I don't feel done. I feel like I was sleeping for a long time. I built this chair 20 years ago for my wife. Then she passed. And I stopped. I thought it was over. But now I'm thinking, maybe I've got one more round in me." He paused, looked straight into the lens. "Maybe you do too." He uploaded it, made a cup of tea, and sat by the window again. It was raining. The kind of soft, slow rain that made the world feel gentle. He thought about calling Eric again. Thought about saying something real this time. Not just, "Hope you're well." Something with weight. But he wasn't ready. Instead, he wrote another list. Finish chair. Build bookshelf. Record daily. Send Eric the link. That last one sat like a stone. But it stayed. Later that evening, he checked the video. One comment. He almost dropped his phone. He clicked. It was from someone named at WriterMom77. She'd written. "My dad was a builder too. He passed last year. Watching this made me cry. Thank you." Frank stared at it for a long time. Then, with fingers trembling not from arthritis but from something deeper, he typed, "Thank you for watching. I'm sorry for your loss. Your dad would be proud." Then he sat back and stared at the chair. He wasn't alone. He had proof. More comments came in the next few days. Slowly at first. A young man who said he missed his grandfather. A woman in Texas who said her father had stopped painting after his wife died, and she was going to send him Frank's videos. Another man in Florida wrote, "I'm 68. Been feeling useless lately. I think I'm gonna pick up my tools again." Frank read each one 3 times. Then he started answering every comment. It was the first time in years he felt like his voice echoed back. Not shouted into the void, but received. Then something unexpected happened. One of the videos was shared on a woodworking forum. Views jumped. 500, 800. Over 1,000. Frank didn't know what to make of it. He wasn't chasing fame. But it felt good. Not because of numbers. Because it meant people still cared. Because maybe, just maybe, he wasn't the only one who'd felt like they were rusting on the shelf. He made a new video that night. "I used to think I had nothing left to offer. That age had taken the best of me. But now, I'm thinking, maybe the best of me is what's left. Maybe the years gave me more than they took." Then he panned over to the chair, now almost finished, and said, "She waited for me. Now I'm building it for both of us." Frank wasn't crying. But he wasn't not crying, either. When he turned off the camera, he sat in silence for a long time, breathing in the scent of old tools and new hope. The next day, the local hardware store manager called. "You're Frank Bennett, right? The one with the videos?" Frank laughed. "Yeah, that's me. Somehow." The manager said a few people had come in asking about him. He offered Frank a small corner display for his work if he ever wanted to sell anything. Frank said he'd think about it. Then he hung up and just sat there in the garage, stunned. He hadn't been asked for anything in years. And now people wanted his work. His story. His presence. That night, he finally opened his email to Eric again. Typed, "Son, I know it's been a long time. I've made mistakes. I shut down when I should have opened up. I want to tell you about something I'm doing. It's small, but it means something to me. I started building again. I'm recording it too. It's called The Rusty Phoenix. I hope you'll watch. I miss you. Love, Dad." He hovered over the send button. Then clicked. And exhaled. 2 days passed. No reply. But he kept building. The final day came. He placed the last screw. Sanded the final edge. The chair was done. 20 years late. But it was done. He placed the sunflower cushion on it. Carried it to the front porch. Sat down. The wood creaked, but it held. He looked out over the quiet street, the setting sun throwing amber light across the grass. And for the first time in decades, He felt like he was exactly where he was supposed to be. Not behind. Not too late. Just here. Alive. Building. Frank didn't expect the video of the finished chair to go viral. He'd filmed it the way he filmed all the others, no fancy editing, no background music, no flashy captions. Just him, the camera, and a single, steady truth: the chair was done. He walked into frame, sat in it slowly, rested his hands on the armrests, and looked straight ahead. "I finished it," he said. "Took 20 years. But I finished it." Then, after a moment of silence, he added, "And if I can finish this, maybe you can finish something too." He didn't think much of it. Just uploaded it and went about his day. Swept the garage. Cleaned his brushes. Made lunch. But when he checked his phone later that afternoon, the numbers didn't make sense. 1,000 views. Then 5,000. Then 15. The comments section was filling up so fast the screen couldn't load them all. People from every corner of the internet were writing things like, "This made me cry, reminds me of my granddad, you're exactly what I needed to see today," and "This isn't just a chair, it's a lesson in starting again." Frank stared at the screen, stunned. He didn't move for a long time. Then, slowly, a smile cracked across his face, not smug or prideful, but grateful. Like something inside him, long dormant, had been recognized. Not for being flashy, not for being young or fast or clever, but for being true. For being real. He opened the front door, stepped outside, and looked at the chair now sitting on the porch like a monument. It caught the late afternoon sun just right, casting long shadows across the floorboards. He sat in it again, this time not as a man finishing something for the past, but as someone stepping into a new future. Not a restart, but a resurrection. His phone buzzed. A message. From Eric. The subject line simply read, "I saw the chair." Frank's hands shook as he opened it. The message was short. "Dad, I saw your video. I didn't expect it to hit me so hard. I watched it twice. Then 3 times. I cried. I don't know what else to say except, I'm sorry. For being so far away. For not calling. I think I didn't know how to talk to you. I guess I thought you didn't want me to. But I was wrong. You've still got something to say. And I want to hear it." Frank read the message 3 times. Then set the phone down and wept. Deep, quiet sobs that came from the place where regret and forgiveness finally meet. He leaned forward, elbows on his knees, face in his hands, and let it all out. Not just for Eric, or Linda, or the chair, but for every year he'd convinced himself it was too late to matter. That night, he didn't cook dinner. He made tea, sat in the chair, and stared at the stars. The sky felt closer than it used to, like it wasn't something above him, but something that included him. He thought again about Elon Musk, that clip playing in his head, "You're not dead yet. Build." And now he understood it more fully. It wasn't about starting a company or launching rockets. It was about refusing to give up on the part of yourself that still has something to give. He whispered into the night, "Thank you," though he didn't know who he was thanking. Musk, maybe. Or Linda. Or the people online who told him he mattered. Or maybe just the part of himself that finally spoke up. The next morning, his inbox had exploded. A producer from a podcast wanted to interview him. A journalist from a small digital publication asked if they could do a piece on the Rusty Phoenix. A man from a senior center in Illinois wrote to ask if Frank would consider doing a virtual talk for their community woodworking group. Frank laughed so hard he nearly dropped his toast. He didn't feel famous. He felt useful. Relevant. Needed. That day, he set up the phone again, and with more confidence than ever, he hit record. "I want to thank everyone who watched the video of the chair. I don't know what I expected. But I didn't expect that. I spent a long time thinking my best years were behind me. That the world didn't want anything from me anymore. But now I see, maybe that was never true. Maybe the world just forgot how to ask. And I forgot how to speak. But I remember now. And if you're watching this, maybe you've got something to say too. Maybe it's not too late. He paused. Looked down. Then back at the camera. So here's what I'm going to do. I'm going to build one new thing every week. Big or small. Doesn't matter. Just something. And I'll share it with you. Because building isn't just about making stuff. It's about making space inside ourselves. And I'm done making excuses. I've got tools. I've got time. And now I've got a reason. He uploaded it. That video passed the previous one within hours. Messages came in from all over the country. People in their 60s, 70s, even 80s, telling him he gave them courage. Younger people, too, grandchildren, kids in college, even one high schooler who wrote, "I showed your chair to my dad." He started drawing again after 10 years. Frank wrote back to each one personally. It took hours. He didn't care. It was the best work he'd done in decades. That evening, he made a new project plan, a shelf for the hallway. Simple. Functional. And with a small engraving at the top, "Still rising." He posted a picture of the sketch, then filmed the process. When it was finished, he added a final clip of the shelf in place, holding a picture of Linda, a wooden clock he'd made back in '89, and the small compass keychain she'd given him. The comments were flooded with hearts, memories, and people sharing pictures of things they'd started building again, birdhouses, boxes, journals, old guitars dusted off after years. The Rusty Phoenix wasn't just a name anymore. It was a signal. A flag in the ground that said, "We're still here. We're still building." The next email from Eric was longer. "Dad, I showed the chair video to Claire. She cried too. She said she wants to meet you. I've been thinking about coming back out. Maybe staying for a while. If you'll have me." Frank read it over and over. Then, slowly, deliberately, he wrote back. "Come home, son. I've got a chair waiting for you." He stared at the words for a long time before hitting send. His hand shook. Not from age, but from meaning. A few days later, another message came. A retirement group in Oregon asked if they could name their new building program, the Rusty Phoenix Builders Club. They wanted to use Frank's videos as part of the curriculum. "Yes," he wrote. "Of course. Yes." Then he closed his laptop, walked into the garage, and looked around. The space didn't feel like a tomb anymore. It felt like a studio. A forge. A launch pad. He took a deep breath, picked up a block of wood, and started drawing. He had no idea what it would be yet. A box? A bench? A table? It didn't matter. What mattered was the doing. The motion. The making. He wasn't trying to prove anything anymore. He was just trying to live honestly. And that, he realized, was more than enough. The day Eric came home, Frank was in the garage, sanding the edges of a new coffee table top. It was maple, bright, firm, clean, and he'd chosen it deliberately, not because it was easy to work with, but because it took polish well. He liked that. A reminder that things could shine again, even after rough beginnings. He didn't hear the car pull up. The wind rattled the garage door, and he thought nothing of it until he turned and saw a figure in the doorway. Tall, older now, broader in the shoulders than he remembered, with gray at the temples and cautious eyes. "Hey, Dad," Eric said. Frank froze. The sander still hummed in his hand. He let it wind down and set it aside. For a second, neither of them spoke. Then Frank pulled the dust mask from his face and said, "You're taller than I remember." Eric smiled, a little nervously. I might have grown a little since high school. Not as much as your kid, Frank replied. Claire, right? Eric nodded. She's in the car. She was nervous. She's got nothing to be nervous about, Frank said. Tell her to come in. Eric walked back to the driveway. A moment later, a girl appeared beside him, 16, maybe 17, with a quiet face and long, dark hair pulled into a braid. She looked like her mother, Frank thought. Eric's ex-wife. The one he never really got to know. Frank stepped out of the garage, wiped his hands on a towel, and walked up. You must be Claire. She nodded. Hi. I'm your granddad, Frank said softly. Took me long enough to say that, huh? She smiled. Better late than never. And in that moment, Frank knew, some bridges, even if burned, can still be rebuilt from the ashes. They spent the afternoon in the living room. Frank brought out iced tea, the same way Linda used to, and offered cookies he'd baked the night before. Eric looked at them skeptically. You bake now? Started last month, Frank said. Turns out I like it. Reminds me of working with softwood. Same patience, same attention. Claire laughed, and Frank smiled. It was the first time he'd heard a young girl laugh in this house since before Linda passed. He felt the air shift, warmer, somehow. Fuller. Eric looked around the room and said, You kept the place the same. Frank nodded. Didn't want to lose her completely. Eric looked down. I'm sorry I didn't come to the funeral. I couldn't. I didn't know how. Frank reached out, placed a hand on his son's arm. I didn't know how to ask you to. They sat in silence. Not heavy silence. Gentle. Earnest. Like an old piece of music being played again. Later, Frank showed them the garage. Claire lit up when she saw the workbench. This is where the magic happens, she asked. It's not magic, Frank said. It's just time, and effort, and forgiving yourself when the cut's not perfect. She ran her fingers across the finished chair. This is the one from the video? It is. It's beautiful. Frank nodded. She would have liked it. Claire turned to her dad. I want to build something. Eric raised an eyebrow. You do? Yeah, she said. With Grandpa. Frank's throat tightened. We can start tomorrow, he said. I've got plenty of extra tools. The next morning, they sketched out a simple bookshelf together. Claire said she wanted it for her room, something she could take to college one day. Frank showed her how to measure twice, how to line up grain patterns, how to use clamps properly. She caught on fast. Every motion reminded Frank of years lost, but also of time still available. That afternoon, he filmed them sanding together. Not for views or validation. Just for memory. For legacy. He posted it with the caption, 3 generations. One build. Never too late. The comments exploded again. Parents started tagging their kids. Teachers emailed asking if Frank would consider making a curriculum. One high school in Ohio even asked if he could zoom into their shop class. Frank agreed without hesitation. He found that he liked sharing what he knew, not to prove his worth, but to extend it. The world had always told him retirement meant fading out. But now he knew better. Retirement didn't have to mean retreat. It could mean rebirth. One night, as they all sat on the porch, Frank in the chair, Claire beside him, Eric leaning against the railing, Frank said quietly, I used to think the world didn't need me anymore. Claire looked at him. Why? Because no one asked me to be part of it, he said. I figured I'd had my time, and that was that. But it turns out, I was just waiting for permission to matter again. You never needed permission, Eric said. Yeah, Claire added. You matter a lot. Frank swallowed hard. I know that now. The stars were bright that night. Clear skies. Cool breeze. Frank leaned back in the chair, hands behind his head, and exhaled. He didn't feel young. But he felt alive. And there was a difference. The next day, Frank started a series on his channel called Things I Wish I'd Said. Each video was short, 5 minutes max stories from his life. Lessons he never shared. Regrets he'd turned into blueprints. One of the first episodes was titled, What If It's Not Too Late? He looked directly into the camera and said, I thought I was too old to start again. I thought I missed my chance. But here I am, 71, building things with my granddaughter. Laughing with my son. Sharing what I know with strangers who feel like family. And I want to tell you something. I was never too old. I just believed the lie that said I was. You're not too old either. You're just waiting for permission. Well, here it is. That video passed 1 million views in 3 days. 1 million people. Watching a man in his 70s talk about sanding wood and rebuilding love. And in the comments, the same phrase kept coming up, I needed this. I thought I was alone. You gave me hope. Frank replied to every single one he could. He said, you're not alone. He said, start small. He said, build something, even if it's just a better conversation. The world, it turned out, hadn't moved on without him. It had just been waiting for him to re-enter. And once he did, everything changed. Claire's bookshelf was finished 2 weeks later. They stained it together, matching it to the deep color of the chair. She engraved her initials into the bottom. Frank added his too. Then, with a small flourish, she carved Phoenix No. 2 into the side. What do you think? She asked. I think this is the start of something, Frank said. Eric took a picture of them holding the shelf together. It went on the wall in the living room, right next to a photo of Linda smiling in the garden. That night, as Frank sipped tea and read the latest comments online, he felt something settle in his chest. Not ambition. Not pride. Peace. A peace built not from comfort, but from movement. From purpose. He had spent 20 years feeling like a man on the bench. But now, he was in the game again. Not because he had something to prove. But because he had something to give. That night, he wrote one final note in his old notebook, I was never too old. I was just waiting to remember who I was. He closed the book. Turned off the light. And stepped into the next chapter of his life, not as a man counting days, but as one making every day count. The letter arrived on a Tuesday, slipped between the electric bill and a furniture store coupon Frank would never use. He almost missed it, would have, if not for the gold embossing on the envelope. It wasn't the kind of mail he usually got. Thick paper. Elegant print. His name written in real ink, not machine printed. Just seeing, Franklin J. Bennett, in cursive again stirred something deep in his chest. He opened it slowly, careful not to tear the seal, and began reading. Dear Mr. Bennett, we've been following your story. Your videos have become a beacon for people across generations. The Rusty Phoenix isn't just a channel, it's a movement. We'd like to formally invite you to speak at the annual American Innovation and Legacy Summit in Chicago. This year's theme is, The Second Act. You've become an emblem of that idea. We would be honored to feature you. Frank sat back in his chair. Chicago. A stage. Him, speaking. He read the letter again, half expecting it to vanish. Then, he set it down and stared across the living room. The bookshelf Claire built with him now held a photo of the three of them, framed in walnut. The chair stood proudly on the porch, catching the afternoon light. And on the table sat a growing stack of envelopes, letters from people who had written to say he'd changed something in them. Frank ran a hand through his hair. He hadn't been on a plane in over 20 years. The last time was for his brother's funeral in Ohio. And the idea of standing in front of hundreds of people felt like a joke. What could he say that hadn't already been said? He wasn't a celebrity. He was a retired guy with a toolbox and a webcam. But still, he was being asked. Invited. Chosen. That night, as he made dinner, baked salmon, rice, and green beans from the garden, he told Eric and Claire about the letter. Eric nearly dropped his fork. Are you serious? Chicago? Claire's eyes lit up. That's huge. Grandpa, you have to go. Frank laughed. I don't even own a suit that fits anymore. We'll get you one, Claire said. You've got to go. This is history. Eric nodded. They wouldn't ask you unless you had something to offer. Frank hesitated. What if I mess it up? Then you mess it up, Eric said. But you'd still be the guy who built his way out of grief. Who helped me find my way back to you. That's the story. It's not about being polished. It's about being real. Frank felt his throat tighten. He looked down at his plate, then back up. All right. I'll do it. But only if you both come with me. Claire clapped. Road trip. Eric grinned. Deal. Over the next 2 weeks, preparations began. Frank bought a navy blue suit and had it tailored. Claire helped him rehearse what he might say. They sat in the garage, her with a notepad, him pacing. Just tell the truth, she said. Start with the chair. Frank nodded. I can do that. When the day finally came, they boarded the flight together. Claire held his hand during takeoff. This is your rocket ship, she said with a smile. Frank chuckled. I'm no Elon Musk. You're my Elon Musk, she replied. The one who woke up and changed everything. Chicago greeted them with wind and light. The city buzzed with energy, taxis, coffee carts, people moving fast with purpose. It overwhelmed Frank at first, but Eric stayed close, guiding him through the crowd with a steady hand on his back. The summit was held at a large downtown hotel. Their suite overlooked Lake Michigan. The night before the speech, Frank couldn't sleep. He stood at the window, staring at the shimmering lights on the water. It reminded him of nights spent in silence after Linda's passing. How he used to wonder if the world even noticed when someone disappeared. But now, he knew better. Every life, every story, had weight. And sometimes, it just needed a platform. The morning of the event, he wore his new suit. Claire adjusted his tie. You look sharp, she said. You look like the man people have already been listening to. Frank smiled. I still feel like the man who forgot to finish a chair. Maybe, she said. But you also became the man who finished it. That's the difference. They arrived early. The event coordinator ushered them backstage. Frank watched from behind the curtain as the crowd filled the auditorium. Hundreds of people. Young, old, in suits and jeans, holding notebooks and coffee cups, waiting. The coordinator approached. You're up in 10. Frank took a deep breath. Claire squeezed his hand. You've got this, Grandpa. He walked out slowly, heart pounding, knees stiff. The stage lights blinded him at first. But then, as he adjusted, he saw them, the audience. Watching. Waiting. Hoping. He stepped to the mic, cleared his throat. My name is Frank Bennett. I'm 71. And I used to think I was finished. The room went quiet. Not bored, listening. He continued. After my wife passed, I stopped building. Stopped creating. Stopped believing there was anything left in me that the world needed. I sat in silence. For years. Thinking I was too old. Too late. Too forgotten. A pause. And then I saw something. A short clip. Elon Musk, standing on a stage, saying 5 words, "You're not dead yet." Build. Murmurs rippled through the crowd. Recognition. Connection. Frank went on. I didn't build a spaceship. Or a company. Or anything that would make headlines. I built a chair. One I had promised my wife 20 years earlier. And I filmed it. Not because I wanted views. But because I needed to say to myself, I'm still here. The crowd leaned in. I thought no one would watch. But people did. They wrote to me. They told me their stories. And something changed. I realized that we're not done just because we're older. We're not irrelevant. We're a damn gold mine of experience. And maybe what the world needs right now isn't more noise, it's more wisdom. Applause broke out. Frank waited. Let it fade. I call my channel the Rusty Phoenix. Because rust is just metal that's waiting to be cleaned. And the phoenix, well, it rises. Laughter. Nods. He wrapped up with a simple message. If you're sitting at home wondering if you still matter, let me tell you, you do. Don't wait for the world to knock. Build something. Say something. Love someone. We're not too old. We're just getting started. The standing ovation came slowly, then grew. Wave after wave of applause. Frank stood still, overwhelmed. His hands trembled. But his heart was steady. Later, after photos and interviews, they returned to the hotel. Frank sat on the bed, tie loosened, eyes shining. Was that real? He asked. It was perfect, Claire said. Eric nodded. You changed lives today. Frank looked out the window, the Chicago skyline glowing against the night. He whispered, almost to himself, I was never too old. I was just waiting for permission. And now, he knew, he didn't need it anymore. After the summit, Frank's inbox was flooded with messages, emails, comments, direct messages, and even handwritten letters. The responses came from across the country, retirees who felt invisible, veterans searching for purpose, widows wanting to rebuild, former teachers ready to share wisdom, and artists afraid they'd lost their spark. One email stood out. It was from a woman named Martha in Asheville, North Carolina. Dear Frank, your story lit a fire in me. I'm 68 and just lost my husband last year. I haven't picked up my paintbrush since. Watching your videos gave me the courage to try again. Would you be interested in helping start a group for people like us? A place to build, create, and share, no matter what age. Sincerely, Martha. Frank stared at the screen, fingers hovering over the keyboard. The idea felt strange but right. A community. A club. A group of people who refused to fade away quietly. He typed back, yes. Let's build it together. Within days, the Builders Club was born. An online forum first, then a monthly meetup that quickly grew from a handful of members to dozens. Frank hosted the virtual meetings from his garage, surrounded by tools, sketches, and the scent of sawdust. Claire helped with tech, moderating chats and managing social media. Eric volunteered as the club's unofficial videographer, capturing projects and stories. The Builders Club was unlike any group Frank had ever seen. There were retired engineers designing small solar panels. Former nurses crafting care packages for seniors. Veterans building adaptive furniture for fellow disabled vets. Writers sharing stories that had been shelved for decades. The club wasn't about perfection. It was about connection. About reclaiming purpose. About proving that age was just a number, not a sentence. One evening, as Frank logged into the Zoom call, the familiar faces filled the screen. Martha, smiling softly with paint-splattered hands. Jim, a former mechanic from Detroit, proudly holding a model airplane. Linda, who'd taken up woodworking to build birdhouses. And dozens more, all united by a shared determination. Frank cleared his throat. Welcome back, everyone. Today, we're starting a new project, the Memory Bench. A place to sit, reflect, and honor what we've been through, and who we're becoming. The group buzzed with excitement. Designs were sketched, materials discussed, and deadlines set. As the weeks passed, the Memory Bench took shape. Members posted photos of their progress. Some worked alone, others teamed up locally. The bench was more than a project, it was a metaphor. For resilience. For memory. For the promise of new chapters. Frank felt a deep sense of fulfillment watching the community grow. Each story shared was a thread in a larger tapestry. He realized that his own healing had become a catalyst for others. One day, Martha sent a message, "Frank, we've been invited to showcase the Memory Bench at the local community center's art festival. Can you come?" The thought of traveling again sent a thrill through him. But also nerves. Still, he accepted. When he arrived in Asheville, the group greeted him warmly. The bench was displayed proudly, carved with names, dates, and symbols of hope. People lingered, touched the wood, and shared their own memories. Frank felt tears sting his eyes. This was more than a project. It was a movement. At the festival, Frank was asked to speak. He stood before an audience of mixed ages, all eager to hear his story. "We're not finished," he said. "Not by a long shot. We're building more than benches or chairs. We're building community, hope, and a future where every age matters." Applause erupted. Back home, inspired by the success, Frank and Claire started a podcast, inviting members of the Builders Club to share their journeys. Each episode was raw, real, and deeply moving. It became a lifeline for many. One listener wrote, "I feel less alone in my struggles. Thank you for reminding me that my story isn't over." Frank often reflected on how far he'd come, from the lonely man who felt invisible to the leader of a vibrant community. Elon Musk's 5 words. "You're not dead yet. Build." Had sparked something far bigger than a chair. They'd ignited a movement. And Frank was ready to keep building, one story, one project, one person at a time. The morning sun spilled softly through the kitchen window, catching dust motes like tiny stars suspended in the air. Frank sat at the table, a half-empty cup of coffee cooling beside him. He stared at his phone, finger hovering over the contacts app. There was a name he hadn't dialed in years, David. His son. The man who hadn't spoken to him since the bitter fallout after Linda's death. The silence between them was a chasm that time hadn't healed. Frank's heart tightened. Regret was an old companion, but today it felt heavier. The letter from the summit, the Builders Club, the new purpose, these things had changed him. But there was one thing he hadn't dared face yet, the son he lost touch with. He thought back to the last fight. David's words, sharp and cold. "You don't care. You never did." Frank had been too proud, too broken to respond. Now, that pride felt like a chain he was ready to break. He dialed the number, his hands trembling. It rang twice before a voice, hesitant and wary, answered. "Dad?" David's voice was older, rougher, like gravel and silence had lived there too long. "Hey, David. It's me." Frank stopped, unsure how to start. "I've been thinking a lot about us. About everything. I'm sorry, son." There was a pause. Then, quietly, "I'm listening." The conversation that followed was slow and tentative, like walking through a house that had been empty for years. They spoke of pain, missed chances, and the loneliness that had settled like dust between them. Frank shared his journey, how building that chair, starting the Rusty Phoenix, and meeting others through the Builders Club had changed him. David talked about his own struggles, the pressure to be perfect, the fear of letting his father down. Neither had answers. But for the first time in a long time, they had a bridge. Over the next weeks, their calls became regular. Frank felt the walls between them crumble, brick by brick. One afternoon, David surprised him with a visit. Standing in the doorway, awkward and unsure, David held a small box. "I found this while cleaning out my place," he said, handing it over. Frank opened it to find a set of old tools, worn, stained, but familiar. The same set Frank had given him as a kid, hoping to pass down the love of building. Tears welled. "I never stopped loving those," David admitted. "I'm ready to try again." They spent the afternoon in the garage, side by side, dusting off old projects and starting new ones. It wasn't perfect. There were moments of frustration and old wounds bubbling up. But also laughter, shared stories, and the slow rekindling of a bond. The garage, once a place of solitude, became a workshop of healing. Inspired by his own reconciliation, Frank reached out to others who had fractured relationships. Members of the Builders Club shared their stories, estranged siblings, lost friends, distant children, and together, they started a new initiative called Rebuild Together. It was about more than fixing things, it was about fixing what felt broken inside. They held workshops on communication, forgiveness, and vulnerability. They created a safe space where people could share fears without judgment. One story stood out. Mary, a widow in her 70s, had been estranged from her daughter for over a decade. Through the Rebuild Together group, she found the courage to write a letter, simple, honest, and full of hope. Months later, her daughter came to visit, and the two began to heal. Frank often thought about Elon Musk's fearless approach, his willingness to take risks, to push beyond limits, to build the impossible. That mindset had inspired him to face his own fears, to break old walls, and to reach out where he once thought it was too late. The process wasn't easy. Healing never was. But it was possible. And as Frank looked around his garage, filled with tools, memories, and now a growing community, he understood something profound: age wasn't a cage, it was a key. The key to opening doors long closed. One chilly evening, Frank sat outside on the porch, the newly built memory bench beside him. David joined him, handing over 2 steaming mugs of tea. They sat in comfortable silence, watching the stars blink awake overhead. "Thank you," David said softly. "For not giving up." Frank smiled, the weight in his chest lifting. "Thank you for letting me back in." The night air was crisp, but their hearts were warm. And the future, once shadowed by regret, now shimmered with possibility. Hit subscribe and leave a comment with where you're watching from. This story might just spark a new beginning. What's one thing that always pushes you forward, even when things get tough? Winter had wrapped the town in a thick blanket of frost, coating every rooftop and tree branch with glistening ice crystals. The streets were quieter than usual, footsteps muffled by freshly fallen snow. Inside his workshop, Frank stood at the workbench, the warm glow of a single lamp casting long shadows across the walls lined with tools and photos of past projects. Outside, the world might have seemed frozen in time, but inside, a fire was burning brighter than ever. The Builders Club had grown from a modest group of strangers to a thriving community spread across the country. From Vermont to California, stories and projects were being shared every day, small sparks igniting in living rooms, garages, and basements. Frank often marveled at how a single idea, fueled by Elon Musk's 5 simple words, had become a quiet revolution. It was not about grandeur or fame. It was about connection, creation, and courage. One project in particular had caught national attention: the memory bench. Originally conceived as a symbol for the Builders Club, it had blossomed into a nationwide movement. Versions of the bench were now popping up in parks, community centers, and nursing homes. Each was handcrafted with love, a place to sit and reflect, to remember lost loved ones, and to inspire those still building their own legacies. Frank smiled as he looked at the latest design sketches sent by club members, a bench with built-in solar lights, weather-resistant wood, and even a small plaque quoting the phrase that had sparked it all, "You're not dead yet. Build." The words had become a mantra. Not just for him, but for thousands of others who refused to accept the limits society had placed on them. Frank received a call from a local news producer who wanted to feature the Builders Club story. Nervous but determined, Frank agreed. The day of the interview arrived, a crisp morning with sunlight reflecting off the snowy streets. The crew set up cameras in his garage, capturing the scent of sawdust and the comforting clutter of half-finished projects. Frank shared his story with a quiet passion, his voice steady and sincere. He spoke of loss and loneliness, the fear of being forgotten, and the moment Elon Musk's words shattered his doubts. It wasn't about building a rocket, Frank explained. It was about building a life worth living again. And that's something anyone can do, no matter their age. The interview aired that evening and quickly went viral. Messages poured in from viewers inspired by Frank's journey, many in his age group, many younger, all moved by the reminder that reinvention wasn't just for the young. The Builders Club membership surged, and with it came a flood of new ideas and energy. Frank watched as members launched projects to help neighbors, teach new skills, and support each other through challenges. One group designed a mobile workshop to bring tools and lessons to seniors unable to leave their homes. Another started a mentorship program pairing retirees with local students eager to learn trades. The quiet revolution was growing louder and stronger. Yet, despite the surge of activity, Frank stayed grounded. He remembered the early days when his world had shrunk to a single chair and a camera. Now, he was part of something much bigger. A movement redefining what it meant to age with purpose. There were challenges, of course. Skepticism from some corners, moments of doubt when growth felt overwhelming, and the ever-present ache of loneliness that sometimes crept back. But Frank met each hurdle with the same determination that had sparked his transformation. One afternoon, Claire joined him in the workshop, holding a letter from a woman named Evelyn, a 74-year-old artist who had started painting again after discovering the Builders Club. "She says your words gave her hope," Claire said, handing over the note. Frank read, "I thought my life was over after my stroke. But now, I paint every day. I'm even teaching a class at the community center. Thank you for reminding me it's never too late." Frank's chest swelled with pride. This was why he kept building, because the smallest sparks could become roaring flames. Later that evening, Frank sat by the fireplace, the warmth soothing his tired bones. Eric was home from college for the weekend, and Claire was nearby, finishing a woodworking project. They talked about the future, of new ideas, new projects, and new ways to keep the Builders Club thriving. "You've changed so many lives, Dad," Eric said, his voice filled with admiration. "And you've changed mine." Frank smiled, the glow of the fire reflecting in his eyes. "I was lost for a long time," he said softly. "But I'm finding my way. And if my story can help someone else find theirs, then it's all worth it." Outside, the snow continued to fall, covering the world in white silence. Inside, the fire burned steady, a quiet revolution lighting the way for all who refused to give up. And Frank knew, deep in his bones, that this was only the beginning. The early morning light filtered through the curtains, soft and golden like a promise. Frank sat quietly at his kitchen table, hands wrapped around a steaming cup of coffee. Outside, the world was waking up, the distant hum of cars, birds chirping, and the gentle rustle of leaves in the breeze. For the first time in years, Frank felt a sense of calm excitement. It was subtle but powerful, a quiet urging deep inside that today might be different. The Builders Club had grown beyond anything he'd imagined, spreading hope and purpose to thousands. But now, Frank was ready to take the next step. The step beyond healing and rebuilding, the step toward dreaming again. For decades, his dreams had been deferred or crushed under the weight of responsibility and loss. The idea of chasing something new seemed almost reckless at times, but Elon Musk's words echoed in his mind, urging him forward, "You're not dead yet. Build." Frank had learned that building wasn't just about wood or tools, it was about creating a life worth living. Today, he decided, he would build a future he hadn't dared to imagine before. He pulled out a notebook, the pages crisp and blank like the fresh snow outside. He began to write, not plans for a project, but a list of dreams. Some small, some bold. To write a book. To travel somewhere he'd never been. To learn a new skill, maybe photography or painting. To speak at more events, sharing his story and inspiring others. The list grew, a reflection of a man who had rediscovered hope and courage. Later that week, Frank joined a local community center's creative writing workshop. Nervous at first, he found himself surrounded by people of all ages, each with their own stories and dreams. The instructor encouraged them to write honestly, without fear of judgment. As Frank penned the opening lines of his story, about loss, fear, and the transformative power of hope, he felt something stir inside him. A voice he thought had been silenced was now speaking clearly. Writing became a new way to build, a way to connect and inspire beyond the walls of his garage. At home, Claire noticed the change. Frank was more animated, more present, and eager to share his ideas. She encouraged him to submit his work to local magazines and blogs. One evening, as they sat by the fire, Frank read aloud a passage about his journey from despair to purpose. Claire's eyes glistened with tears. "You've come so far," she said softly. "And you're only just beginning." Meanwhile, the Builders Club continued to thrive. Members shared their own dreams, forming support groups for writing, art, travel, and lifelong learning. Frank helped launch a Dream Fund, pooling donations to help members pursue new adventures or education. One member, George, used the fund to attend a woodworking course he'd dreamed about for decades. Another, Susan, finally booked a trip to visit her grandchildren across the country. The impact was tangible and profound. Frank felt humbled and energized by the ripple effect of one small choice to start building again. One afternoon, a letter arrived that changed everything. It was from an editor at a well-known publishing house, interested in Frank's story. They wanted to turn his journey into a memoir, to inspire readers nationwide. Frank's heart raced. The opportunity was thrilling but also terrifying. Could he open himself fully to the world? Was he ready to be vulnerable on such a scale? With Claire's unwavering support, he decided to take the leap. Writing the book was a new challenge, a process filled with moments of doubt, exhaustion, and unexpected joy. Frank relived painful memories but also discovered strength he didn't know he had. He poured his heart into every page, determined to honor the journey that had brought him back to life. As the manuscript neared completion, Frank was invited to speak at a conference on aging and innovation. Standing on stage before hundreds of faces, young and old, he shared his story, not as a tale of defeat, but as a testament to resilience and the power of dreaming again. The audience was silent, captivated by his honesty and hope. Afterward, people approached him with gratitude, sharing how his story had sparked their own courage. Walking off the stage, Frank felt a profound sense of purpose. He realized that dreaming again was not just for himself, but for everyone who felt trapped by time or circumstance. The world was full of new horizons waiting to be explored. One evening, as Frank and Claire sat on the porch, watching the sunset paint the sky with vibrant hues, Frank reflected on the journey so far. "I wasted so many years thinking I was too old, too broken to change," he said quietly. But Elon's words gave me permission to matter again. To dream again. To build again. Claire squeezed his hand. "And you're doing it, one day, one dream, one life at a time." Frank smiled, a lightness in his chest. The future was wide open, full of possibility. And this time, he wasn't afraid to chase it. Spring was awakening the town with bursts of color, pink blossoms on the dogwood trees, fresh green leaves unfurling, and the scent of damp earth rising after the morning rain. Frank stood in his workshop, the door wide open to let in the gentle breeze, carrying with it a promise of growth and renewal. The Builders Club had evolved far beyond the garage where it began. What started as a small gathering of people seeking purpose had transformed into a nationwide movement inspiring thousands. And Frank felt a quiet pride knowing he had been part of that spark. But now, as he looked around his cluttered workspace, he realized that the movement had outgrown him. It was no longer about just one man's story, it was about countless stories, voices, and lives interwoven in a tapestry of resilience and hope. Frank's phone buzzed. It was a message from Claire, new member from Alaska wants to start a chapter. The words filled him with awe. The Builders Club had reached the farthest corners of the country, touching lives that he would never meet in person but that mattered just as deeply. That afternoon, Frank joined a video call with club leaders from across the states. Faces lit up the screen, some familiar, others new, all united by a shared passion to build, connect, and uplift. Each leader shared updates on local projects, community gardens built by retired farmers, tech classes for seniors taught by former engineers, storytelling nights hosted by writers rediscovering their voices. The diversity of projects reflected the diversity of people, and the universal desire to keep growing, creating, and belonging. As Frank listened, he felt the movement's energy surge through the screen, bridging miles and generations. It was more than a club now, it was a family. After the call, Frank sat back, reflecting on how a simple phrase had changed everything. "You're not dead yet. Build." Those 5 words had become a beacon for people who felt lost or forgotten, reminding them that life's value didn't diminish with age, it evolved. One story he often thought about was that of Joan, a 72-year-old former schoolteacher from Kansas. Joan had felt invisible after retirement, isolated in a small town where everyone seemed to have moved on. But when she discovered the Builders Club, everything changed. She started a book exchange program, bringing neighbors together and rekindling a sense of community. Joan's story was just one of thousands, but it exemplified the ripple effect Frank hoped to inspire. On a crisp Saturday morning, Frank and Claire drove to a nearby community center where the Builders Club was hosting a large gathering. The room buzzed with excitement, tables were covered with project plans, tools, art supplies, and homemade snacks. Members mingled, sharing stories and laughter. Frank was greeted warmly, hugged by people whose lives he had touched and who had touched his in return. A banner read, "Building together, growing together." Frank stepped to the front to speak. The room quieted. He spoke from his heart, reminding everyone that their collective strength was unstoppable. "We started with a simple idea," he said. "That we're not finished. That we still have something to give, to build, to create. And look at what we've made, communities, friendships, hope." The applause was thunderous, but Frank's favorite moment came after the speech when a young woman approached him. She was in her early 30s, full of energy and gratitude. "My grandmother was part of your club," she said. "She passed last year, but her stories and projects live on. You helped give her a new purpose. You helped give our family new memories." Frank's eyes misted. This was the true legacy, the lives touched beyond measure. Back at home, Frank found himself inspired to dream even bigger. He reached out to local leaders, exploring partnerships with senior centers, libraries, and nonprofits to expand the Builders Club's reach. He also began mentoring younger volunteers who wanted to start their own chapters. One such volunteer, Marcus, was a 27-year-old tech enthusiast passionate about bridging generational gaps. Together, they brainstormed ways to integrate technology with hands-on projects, making the club accessible to even more people. Frank was amazed by Marcus's energy and vision, grateful for the reminder that every generation had something vital to offer. The collaboration sparked new ideas, virtual workshops, online tool libraries, and even a podcast featuring stories from members nationwide. As the Builders Club embraced the digital age, it became a true movement. One that transcended age, geography, and circumstance. One night, Frank sat quietly in his workshop, gazing at a wall filled with photos and letters from members. Each image told a story of transformation, courage, and connection. He thought about the lonely man he had been, the man who believed his best years were behind him. And he smiled, knowing that he had found not only his own purpose but helped others find theirs. Elon Musk's 5 words had been a wake-up call, but the real power was in the choices that followed. In the decision to keep building, keep reaching out, and keep dreaming. Frank whispered softly to the quiet room, "This is just the beginning." Outside, the night sky stretched vast and full of stars, each one a beacon, a promise, a spark waiting to ignite. And Frank, surrounded by his community and the legacy they were creating, knew that the ripple effect would continue to grow, carrying hope and strength to every corner of the world. Spring had blossomed fully into summer, painting the town with vibrant colors and warm breezes that carried the laughter of children playing outside. Frank was in his workshop early, the scent of freshly cut wood mingling with the sharp tang of sawdust. His hands moved with practiced ease, shaping a small piece of oak into a birdhouse, a project inspired by a request from the local senior center. The Builders Club had taken on new meaning for Frank. It was no longer just about rebuilding his own life but about giving back to the community that had nurtured him through his darkest days. But today, something different stirred inside him. A quiet sense that the act of giving might bring unexpected gifts in return. That afternoon, Frank drove to the senior center to deliver the birdhouses the club members had made. The sun filtered through the large windows, casting a golden glow over the room filled with elders chatting and sharing stories. Frank was greeted warmly, handed a cup of lemonade, and invited to join the group. As he sat among them, he realized this was more than just a drop-off, it was a gathering of spirits hungry for connection and purpose. One woman, Helen, a spry 80-year-old with sharp eyes and a quick wit, approached him. "You've done more than build birdhouses, Frank," she said, her voice warm but firm. "You've built bridges between people who thought they had nothing left to offer." Her words struck a chord. Frank had always believed that giving was a one-way street, a way to help others. But Helen's insight hinted at something deeper, that giving and receiving were intertwined, like threads weaving a tapestry of life. Later, as Frank walked home through the blooming park, his phone buzzed with messages from club members sharing photos and stories of their own giving projects, gardens planted, meals shared, letters written to those isolated by distance or illness. Each message carried a ripple of kindness, and Frank felt humbled to be part of this growing wave. That night, a surprise awaited him. Claire handed him an envelope, the handwriting unfamiliar but elegant. Inside was a letter from a young man named David, a former homeless veteran who had found solace and purpose through the Builders Club. David wrote of how the club's message had pulled him from despair and given him a reason to wake up every day. "You gave me hope when I thought I had none," the letter read. "Now, I'm giving back by mentoring others. You helped me find my way, and I want to help others find theirs." Tears welled in Frank's eyes. This was the unexpected gift Helen had spoken of, the gift of witnessing lives transformed by simple acts of giving and community. It reminded him that his journey was never just about himself, it was part of a larger story of healing and hope. Inspired, Frank decided to visit the local Veterans Center the next day. There, he met a group of men and women who, like David, were rebuilding their lives after hardship. Frank shared his story, listening as they spoke of loss, resilience, and dreams deferred. Together, they brainstormed projects that could bring the Builders Club's message to even more people in need. One idea was to create mobile workshops, vans stocked with tools and materials that could travel to shelters, nursing homes, and rural areas. The plan excited Frank, opening new horizons for outreach and impact. Back home, Frank felt a renewed sense of purpose. Giving had opened doors to unexpected friendships, new dreams, and a deeper understanding of life's interconnectedness. He realized that sometimes, the greatest gifts came wrapped in the simplest packages, an encouraging word, a shared story, a hand extended in kindness. That evening, as the sun dipped below the horizon, Frank sat on his porch with Claire, watching the sky turn shades of pink and orange. "I used to think I had nothing left to give," he said softly. "But now, I see that giving is also receiving. It's a cycle that keeps us alive." Claire smiled, squeezing his hand. "You've taught so many people that lesson, Frank. And you're still teaching me every day." Frank smiled back, the warmth in his chest glowing brighter than the fading sun. The unexpected gift was not just the difference he had made in others' lives, but the difference they had made in his. And as night settled over the town, Frank knew that this cycle of giving and receiving would carry him forward, lighting the way for all the days yet to come. The summer sun was relentless, beating down on the small town with a fierce intensity that made even the shade feel warm. Frank sat on his porch, the cool glass of iced tea sweating in his hand, but inside, a storm was brewing. Despite the momentum of the Builders Club and the new horizons opening before him, doubt crept in like a shadow he couldn't shake. Was he truly making a difference, or was this just a fleeting illusion? At night, the familiar voices of fear whispered louder. What if it was all too late? What if his body couldn't keep up? What if he wasn't enough? The truth was, Frank had always carried those fears like a weight in his chest, but now, with so many eyes on him, the pressure felt heavier. One morning, after a restless night filled with anxious dreams, Frank received an email from a longtime member who had quietly left the club months ago. The message was brief but sharp: "I don't see the point anymore. Too many obstacles. Too old to change. Sorry." The word stung, and Frank found himself questioning the very thing he had built. That day, he didn't head to his workshop. Instead, he wandered through the town streets, searching for clarity. The familiar places, old diners, the library, the park bench where he and Claire had shared their first kiss, felt distant and hollow. He thought about the years he had wasted feeling invisible and feared he might slip back into that dark place. Later, scrolling through his phone, he stumbled on a clip from Elon Musk during a conference. Elon was speaking about failure, persistence, and the importance of embracing fear as a catalyst rather than a barrier. "Fear is the mind killer," Elon said. "The greatest risk is not taking one. You have to decide to face it, not run from it." The word struck Frank like a jolt of electricity. He realized that fear was a natural part of change, not a sign to stop but a signal to push forward. That evening, Frank called Marcus, the young volunteer who had been helping with the digital expansion of the Builders Club. Marcus didn't sugarcoat the challenges ahead but reminded Frank why they started: to prove that age and doubt could be overcome with action and community. Inspired, Frank wrote a letter to all club members, raw and honest. He shared his struggles with doubt and fear, inviting others to open up about their own shadows. The response was overwhelming. Messages poured in, stories of resilience, admissions of vulnerability, and offers of support. The Builders Club was not a place of perfection but a space for real people confronting real fears. That night, Frank sat by the fire with Claire, reflecting on the power of connection. "Maybe fear is the price we pay for growth," he said. Claire nodded. "And sharing it is how we pay that price together." The next morning, Frank felt a renewed sense of purpose. He knew the shadows would return, but he was no longer alone. Armed with vulnerability, community, and the spark of Elon's fearless mindset, he was ready to face whatever came next. The heat of summer lingered in the air, but Frank felt a fresh breeze stirring within him, a restless energy, a call to move beyond the comfortable bounds of his community and into something larger. The Builders Club had grown into a beacon of hope, but now Frank sensed the moment had come for a new mission. One that reached beyond tools and projects, beyond his garage and small town, to a world desperately needing change. Frank's mornings began with longer walks through the neighborhood, thoughts swirling like leaves in the wind. He pondered the challenges he had faced and those that lay ahead, not just for himself, but for countless others trapped by fear, age, and doubt. He realized the club's mission was more than personal transformation, it was about shaking the foundations of what society believed about aging and purpose. One evening, scrolling through social media, Frank saw Elon Musk speaking again, not about rockets this time, but about the future of humanity and the power of vision. Elon said, "If you want to change the world, start by changing the story you tell yourself." Those words ignited a fire in Frank's heart. It was time to help others rewrite their stories, not just in his town but everywhere. Frank began reaching out to nonprofits, senior organizations, and media outlets, sharing the Builders Club's story and inviting collaboration. The response was astonishing. Invitations to speak, to consult, to partner poured in. The club became a model for communities nationwide. Frank teamed up with Marcus to launch a digital platform, a hub where seniors could share stories, skills, and dreams, a place to learn, teach, and inspire across generations. The website featured video workshops, live events, and personal stories, turning isolated individuals into connected, empowered participants in a larger movement. One day, Frank received a call from a university professor working on aging and innovation. She wanted to study the Builders Club's impact and use its principles to influence policy. Frank was both humbled and thrilled. This was the change he dreamed of, real, systemic change that challenged society's narrow views on aging. As summer deepened, Frank traveled to conferences and forums, sometimes alongside Claire, sharing his journey and the club's vision. Each presentation was met with applause, but more importantly, with genuine conversations about hope and possibility. Back home, the Builders Club hosted its biggest event yet, a summit bringing together members from across the country. The energy was electric, filled with laughter, tears, and renewed commitments. Frank took the stage and shared a simple truth: we are more than our age. We are builders of community, of dreams, of futures. And together, we are changing the world, one life at a time. After the summit, as Frank looked out over the sea of faces, young and old, hopeful and determined, he felt a profound gratitude. The journey from despair to purpose was no longer his alone. It was a movement, a revolution in how we see aging and ourselves. That night, Frank and Claire sat under the stars, the cool air humming with possibility. "What's next?" Claire asked. Frank smiled, eyes shining. "Whatever it takes to keep building. To keep dreaming. To keep changing the story, for all of us." Summer's heat gave way to early autumn's crisp air, the town bathed in golden hues of amber and crimson, leaves drifting lazily to the ground. Frank's body, once strong and steady, was beginning to whisper warnings he couldn't ignore. The mornings that used to greet him with energy now arrived with stiffness and ache. The birdhouses he shaped in the workshop felt heavier in his hands. The long walks that cleared his mind grew shorter, interrupted by moments of breathlessness. The physical toll of aging, the very thing he had fought to transcend, was now an undeniable presence. Frank sat on his porch one evening, watching the sun slip behind the hills, a cool breeze stirring the leaves at his feet. The ache in his knees was a sharp reminder: the body was aging, even if the spirit still burned bright. He had always prided himself on pushing past limits, inspired by Elon Musk's relentless drive, but now he faced a new, humbling frontier. The challenge was no longer just mental or emotional, it was deeply physical. That night, Frank confided in Claire, his voice low but honest. "I don't want to slow down," he said. "But my body feels like it's fighting me." Claire reached out, holding his hand gently. "You're still moving forward, Frank. It's okay to listen to your body while still chasing your dreams." The next day, Frank visited his doctor, who delivered a candid assessment. "Frank, your body's showing signs of wear. You'll need to adjust your activities and prioritize recovery. It's about balance now, not giving up, but adapting." The doctor's words stung, but Frank knew they were true. He returned home, grappling with a mixture of frustration and acceptance. That evening, he found solace in an old podcast episode featuring Elon Musk, who spoke about failure and resilience in the face of unexpected challenges. Elon said, when something's important enough, you do it even if the odds aren't in your favor. Those words reignited Frank's determination. He realized that the journey wasn't about defying aging but embracing it with courage and creativity. Over the following weeks, Frank adapted his routines. He incorporated gentle stretching, light yoga, and meditation into his days, focusing on maintaining strength and flexibility. He invited a physical therapist to speak at the Builders Club, educating members on aging bodies and how to care for them. The club embraced these lessons, transforming into a community not just of builders but of learners, adapting to the inevitable changes while holding on to purpose. One afternoon, Frank struggled to finish a project in the workshop. His hands trembled, and fatigue crept in. For a moment, doubt surged. Was this the beginning of the end? But then a voice inside whispered, "Not yet." That night, Frank sat quietly, reflecting on his journey. The fire inside him was still alive, but now it required new fuel, patience, compassion, and acceptance. He wrote in his journal, "Strength is not just in muscle but in heart and mind. I will build with what I have, where I am." The physical challenges became a catalyst for growth, teaching Frank that resilience took many forms. He found joy in smaller victories, a steady hand, a finished birdhouse, a smile from a new friend in the club. Each step, no matter how small, was progress. As autumn deepened, Frank organized a special event at the club, Embracing Change. Members shared stories of physical struggles and triumphs, creating a safe space for vulnerability and support. The room was filled with tears and laughter, understanding and encouragement. Frank realized that the real strength of the Builders Club wasn't just in building projects but in building each other up, body, mind, and soul. One evening, after the event, Claire sat beside Frank, her eyes bright with admiration. "You're teaching all of us how to face what we fear," she said. "Not by ignoring it, but by welcoming it." Frank smiled, the ache in his joints softened by the warmth in his chest. The journey was far from over, but he had found a new rhythm, a dance between struggle and grace. As the last leaves fell and winter approached, Frank stood in his workshop, a renewed sense of purpose guiding his hands. The physical limits were real, but so was his resolve. And with each breath, each movement, he was proving that age might change the body, but it could never dim the light of a determined soul. The cold bite of winter softened into early spring's tender warmth, bringing new life to the sleepy town. Frank watched as buds pushed through the thawing ground, a quiet reminder that renewal was always possible, even after the harshest seasons. In his workshop, the familiar scent of sawdust and pine mingled with the fresh promise of change. Yet beneath that promise stirred something deeper, a restless stirring of dreams long buried beneath years of doubt and too old excuses. It had been decades since Frank had pursued what once set his heart ablaze, music. As a young man, he'd dreamed of playing guitar on stage, sharing stories through song, but life's weight, responsibilities, losses, and self-doubt, had buried that passion deep inside. Now, inspired by the courage he'd seen in others and the relentless spark of Elon Musk's example, Frank decided to reclaim that forgotten piece of himself. One evening, after the Builders Club meeting, Frank brought out an old, dusty guitar from the corner of his workshop. The strings were worn, some broken, but the wood still gleamed softly in the lamplight. He hesitated, fingers trembling as they brushed over the strings. A shaky chord rang out, awkward but alive. It was a start. Over the next weeks, Frank dedicated moments each day to rediscovering music, learning old songs, experimenting with new chords, sometimes singing softly to himself. The act of creating sound, of expressing emotion through melody, brought a joy he hadn't known in years. It wasn't about perfection or performance, it was about reclaiming a lost language of the soul. Frank shared his journey with the Builders Club, and soon others followed. A former teacher dusted off her paintbrushes, an ex-chef started hosting cooking classes, a retired nurse began writing poetry. The club transformed from a builder's workshop into a vibrant mosaic of passions rekindled and dreams reborn. One afternoon, Claire surprised Frank with a small recording device. "Let's capture your music," she said, eyes shining with encouragement. Nervous but excited, Frank recorded a simple song, his voice rough but sincere, the guitar weaving a story of hope and resilience. They shared the recording online, and the response was overwhelming. Messages poured in from listeners moved by Frank's honesty and courage, many sharing their own stories of lost dreams and newfound courage. The music became a bridge, connecting hearts across distances and generations. Inspired, Frank organized the first-ever Builders Club Passion Showcase, a community event celebrating creativity at every age. The town hall buzzed with anticipation as members prepared to share their talents: painting, singing, storytelling, dancing. Frank opened the event with a song he wrote, lyrics filled with the message that it's never too late to dream. The room erupted in applause, tears glistening on many faces. That night, as Frank stood beneath a sky scattered with stars, he felt a deep sense of peace and possibility. The passion that had once seemed lost was alive and pulsing through him, a testament to the truth that age was no barrier to the heart's deepest desires. Elon Musk's fearless mindset had sparked the flame, but it was Frank's courage to nurture it that made it blaze. "I was never too old to dream," Frank thought, fingers still tingling from the strings. "I was just waiting to believe again." And as the night wrapped the town in quiet embrace, Frank knew this was only the beginning of a new, beautiful chapter. One where every note, every brushstroke, every word spoken was a step toward a life fully lived. Spring blossomed fully, painting the town in vibrant greens and bursts of color from blooming flowers. The air was alive with the sounds of birdsong and children's laughter drifting from the nearby schoolyard. Yet beneath the town's peaceful surface, a quiet revolution was unfolding, one sparked by Frank's transformation and the Builders Club's growing influence. What had begun as a small gathering of neighbors working on projects in a garage had become a beacon of possibility, a living testament to the power of belief and action at any age. Frank woke early that morning with a sense of anticipation and purpose. The previous months had brought invitations to speak at local events, interviews with regional media, and connections with senior centers and nonprofits across the state. His story, once hidden behind years of silence and doubt, was now resonating far beyond the boundaries of his small town. As he sipped his morning coffee, Frank's phone buzzed with a message from a woman named Linda, who had discovered the Builders Club through a video he shared. "Your story gave me the courage to start a community garden with my neighbors," the message read. "Thank you for showing me it's never too late." The words warmed Frank's heart, reminding him that the movement was no longer just his journey, it was a collective awakening. At the next Builders Club meeting, the energy was electric. Members shared updates on their projects and passions, from digital literacy classes to neighborhood cleanups. The club's virtual platform had expanded, connecting seniors across the country who found in it a space to learn, create, and belong. Frank introduced a new initiative called Ripple Grants, small funds awarded to members for projects that could spark positive change in their communities. The idea was simple: empower individuals to become leaders and builders in their own right, no matter their age or background. The response was immediate and inspiring. Proposals poured in: an intergenerational storytelling podcast, an urban beekeeping project, a series of workshops teaching technology to isolated seniors. Each proposal carried the seed of transformation, and Frank marveled at the creativity and courage blossoming in places he never imagined. One afternoon, Frank received an unexpected invitation to speak at a national conference on aging and innovation. The opportunity was thrilling but intimidating. Standing before a crowd of policymakers, academics, and advocates, Frank shared his journey from despair to purpose, the lessons learned from embracing vulnerability and persistence, and the ripple effect that one small spark of courage could ignite. His words were met with standing ovations and heartfelt conversations that followed, opening doors to new partnerships and possibilities. Back home, the Builders Club continued to thrive, its members emboldened by the knowledge that their efforts were part of a larger movement redefining what it meant to age. Frank's phone rang one evening with a call from a local newspaper editor, excited to feature the club's impact in a front-page story. The article reached thousands, drawing new members and supporters eager to be part of the change. Yet with the growing attention came challenges, critics questioning whether older adults could truly adapt in a fast-changing world, skeptics doubting the movement's sustainability. Frank faced these voices not with anger but with quiet confidence, knowing that action and example spoke louder than words. He often thought back to Elon Musk's belief in defying limits and embracing the impossible, a mindset that had fueled his own transformation. The club's success was not just in what they built, but in how they had reshaped their own beliefs and those around them. One evening, as Frank and Claire walked through the town square lit by the soft glow of street lamps, they passed a mural painted by local artists, vibrant images of seniors laughing, working, and dreaming. Below it, a plaque read, "In honor of those who refuse to be forgotten." Frank paused, touched deeply. "We're part of something bigger than ourselves," he said softly. Claire smiled, squeezing his hand. "And it's only just beginning." The ripple effect was undeniable. What started as a single man's fight against despair had blossomed into a movement touching countless lives, proof that age was not a limit but a launching pad. Frank realized that the true power of the Builders Club lay not just in the projects or the numbers, but in the hope it inspired, the belief that no matter where you start, you could create a legacy worth leaving. As spring gave way to summer, Frank felt the weight of years and challenges but also the lightness of purpose and connection. In the faces of his fellow builders, in the messages from strangers who had found courage, he saw the promise of a future rewritten by those who refused to accept being too old. Elon Musk's 5 words, "You have to face it," had sparked the flame, but it was the steady, shared steps of a community that fanned it into a blaze. And Frank knew, as the night sky stretched wide above him, that this was just the beginning of a new era, one where age was celebrated, potential was limitless, and dreams were never out of reach. The summer sun hung heavy over the town, casting long shadows across familiar streets that now seemed to carry more memories than footsteps. For Frank, the season brought not just warmth but a bittersweet reckoning. His body, faithful but aging, had grown frilier, and whispers of mortality edged ever closer. Yet the hardest battle was not with time itself but with the ties that bound him to the past, ties of love, regret, and unfinished stories. One morning, Frank sat in the quiet of his workshop, the hum of distant lawnmowers blending with the soft creak of wooden beams. His hands rested on a half-finished birdhouse, a symbol of hope and purpose, yet his mind drifted to the memories he'd tried so long to bury. The faces of those he'd lost, the wife he had loved and lost too soon, the son with whom he'd grown distant, surfaced with a painful clarity. The ache in his heart was sharper than any physical pain. For years, Frank had carried the weight of what-ifs and could-have-beens, the silent regrets that shadowed even his brightest moments. But now, fueled by the courage he had found and the community he had built, Frank realized that to fully move forward, he had to confront these ghosts. That afternoon, he reached out to his son, David, a man he hadn't spoken to in nearly a decade. The phone call was tentative at first, voices thick with years of silence and unspoken pain. But beneath the awkward words lay a yearning to reconnect, to heal. They spoke long into the night, sharing stories, apologies, and hopes, laying down old burdens with tentative hands. It was a fragile beginning, but a beginning nonetheless. The next day, Frank visited the small cemetery where his wife, Mary, rested. Standing before her grave, he spoke aloud, words he hadn't dared say in years. "I'm still building, Mary. Not just with wood, but with hope. I'm learning to let go and live." The cool breeze carried his words as if the earth itself was listening. The act of letting go was not easy. It required courage greater than any physical feat, greater than any project completed in his workshop. It meant embracing loss while opening the heart to new possibilities. The Builders Club, sensing Frank's struggle, rallied around him. Members shared their own stories of grief and renewal, creating a circle of support that strengthened Frank's resolve. One evening, Claire found Frank staring out the window, eyes distant yet peaceful. "It's okay to let go, Frank," she said softly. Letting go doesn't mean forgetting. It means making space for what's next. That night, Frank journaled his thoughts, reflecting on the lessons of the past years, the power of courage, the necessity of community, and the gift of second chances. He wrote, "I was never too old to forgive, to reconnect, to love again." As summer waned, Frank felt a lightness returning, a quiet grace born from acceptance. The hardest goodbye was not a closing but an opening, a passage from old pain to new hope. The Builders Club continued to thrive, and Frank's story now included this vital chapter of healing. He knew the journey was far from over, but with each breath, each step forward, he was building a legacy not just of projects and passion but of love reclaimed and life embraced. Under the fading light of a summer evening, Frank whispered to the stars, "Thank you for giving me the strength to let go and the courage to move forward." And in that moment, he felt truly free. The morning sun spilled through the window, casting a warm golden glow over Frank's workshop. The scent of fresh pine and sawdust filled the air, mingling with the faint aroma of brewing coffee from the kitchen nearby. Birds chirped outside as if welcoming a new day, not just any day, but a new chapter in Frank's life. He sat at his workbench, the familiar feel of wood beneath his hands grounding him. Around him, unfinished projects waited patiently, a birdhouse half-painted, a small bench with soft curves, a hand-carved plaque that read simply, "Never too old." Frank smiled to himself. He wasn't the same man who had once sat in that lonely kitchen, feeling invisible and forgotten. The man who'd believed his best years were behind him had been replaced by someone stronger, wiser, and fiercely alive. Today was the celebration of the Builders Club's 5-year anniversary, a milestone Frank never imagined reaching. What began as a small, hopeful spark had grown into a thriving community of dreamers and doers, seniors rediscovering purpose, passion, and power. The event was held in the town hall, transformed with banners, lights, and photographs capturing moments of joy and transformation. Frank stepped onto the stage, his heart steady but full. Faces filled the room, familiar friends, new members, supporters from neighboring towns, and even some younger visitors curious about the movement. As Frank spoke, his voice carried not just the story of his own journey but the collective heartbeat of every person who had ever felt too old to matter. He recounted the moment he first heard Elon Musk's 5-word wake-up call, "You have to face it." Those words had shattered the chains of fear and doubt, propelling him into a life he never thought possible. "Age is not a cage," Frank told the audience. "It's a door. Behind it lies our potential waiting to be unlocked." Applause rippled through the room, but it was the quiet moments between words, when eyes met and hearts connected, that spoke loudest. After his speech, Frank walked through the crowd, greeted with hugs, handshakes, and tears. He listened to stories of transformation, a widow who learned to paint, a former accountant who launched a community garden, a veteran who found healing through storytelling. Each story was a thread woven into the tapestry of the Builders Club legacy. Claire stood beside him, pride shining in her eyes. "Look at what you've built," she said softly. "Not just birdhouses and benches, but hope." Frank's gaze drifted to a young woman approaching, a documentary filmmaker named Maya who had traveled from the city to capture the Builders Club story. "We want to show the world what's possible," she said. "Your journey, this movement, it's inspiring." Frank nodded, humbled. The idea that their work could ripple beyond the town's borders was a reminder that purpose, once found, could light the way for countless others. Later that evening, as the celebration wound down, Frank sat on the porch with Claire, the night sky a blanket of stars overhead. The soft hum of cicadas filled the air, a soothing soundtrack to reflection. "I thought it was the end," Frank began, voice steady and sure. "But it was just the beginning." Claire smiled, squeezing his hand. "You showed us all that we're never too old to matter. To change. To dream." Frank felt a deep gratitude, not just for the journey but for the people who had walked it alongside him. He thought of Elon Musk, the man whose fearless mindset had sparked the fire, and of every moment when doubt threatened to take hold but was met with courage instead. In that quiet moment, Frank realized his true legacy wasn't in the projects completed or the accolades earned, but in the lives touched and the hope kindled. The builders, the dreamers, the fighters, they were proof that age was not a limit but a launch pad. Frank whispered to the stars, "I was never too old. I was just waiting for permission to matter again." And in the glow of that night, beneath the vast expanse of possibility, Frank knew with certainty that this new legacy, his legacy, was alive, thriving, and just beginning to unfold. Hit subscribe and leave a comment with where you're watching from. This story might just spark a new beginning. What's one thing that always pushes you forward, even when things get tough?